Welcome, Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast, and I have a special treat for you today. Mike McCarthy is a gentleman I've watched from literally afar since he's in the UK. Really admire the work that he's done for suicide awareness and suicide advocacy. And today will be a tough show. We're going to talk about mental health challenges that we have in the Gen Z space and even in the adult space. But I think what I'd like to start with, Mike, is just introduce you to the show. Thank you very much for so many things that you do to bring attention to these important issues that seems to not get talked enough about. But welcome to the Living Undeterred podcast. And again, maybe give our followers and listeners a little background on where you are zooming in from, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, Jeff, and thank you for your interest. It's much appreciated. And the more that I've spoken to people in the States, the more I've recognized the fact that, there are so many similarities between our two nations when it comes to suicide and suicide prevention. I'm a former journalist, a television reporter and presenter. I used to work for the BBC and for Sky News here in the UK. I've really travelled around the world covering stories ranging from terrorist atrocities to wars. I was in Afghanistan and Iraq, to a whole range of stuff. I was always a generalist, never really specialised in anything, just always appreciated the variety of the news world that I was part of. And thought that I'd built up quite a tough shell over the years. I thought that I'd seen and heard about most things that are going on out there. I'd certainly witnessed trauma at first hand. And I retired, sort of thanking my lucky stars that I had a great career to look back on. It was the ticket of a lifetime. And if I had my time over again, I would do all of that exactly the same. But I have to go to the 20th of February, 2021 to begin telling the story as it is now. I went to bed and sometimes wonder, did I appreciate the great things that I'd got in my life, the wonderful family, close family, the good life that I'd had, the career that I've just mentioned. And the honest truth is that I can't remember. And in all truthfulness, I guess the answer would be that I didn't really fully appreciate how happy I was and how contented we were as a family. I got a call at 3:30 in the morning from my son's fiancée to say that she'd found our beloved son, Ross, who was 31, and that it wasn't looking too good, that the ambulance crew were there, and that she'd call back as soon as she had any information. She called back 5 minutes later to tell us that Ross had taken his life. So we packed our bags in the middle of the night and we drove the 2 hours to where Ross lived. And that's where this whole kind of new existence began, where a whole new life started. It felt as though we were in a world that we weren't meant to be part of. We were in a reality that we didn't recognize. And we were it felt as though we'd been shunted off a railway track onto a different journey that we weren't meant to be taking. That was 2 years ago. Last week was the second anniversary of Ross's death, and things, as you can imagine, are very different now.
Well, I hope you can feel the hug I'm giving you right now. My heart goes out to you and for you and all the people that have been impacted by that moment. 2 years. I really admire your courage. What you've done in 2 years since Ross's passing is heroic in my eyes. It took me much longer to get to where I'm at. I think everybody has their own path, their own pathway to how you navigate through this. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on the show is hear your story. Obviously, where you will have what you have done in 2 years is amazing to me, Mike. I admire. I know it's tough. I mean, it's hard every day for me, and I can only imagine for you and your family. And um, it changes you to your DNA, and it doesn't do a lot of good. And I had this conversation with your friend Steve. To go back and play what if games. But we all do. I'm sure if I were to ask you the question that people probably do ask you, especially with suicide, our son's death was fentanyl. Would you have done anything? Were there signs that now you see in we all have the benefit of hindsight, Mike. Hindsight's always correct. But when you do allow yourself time to go back and look at opportunities, do you see things that you missed or signs that Ross was reaching out but didn't really ask to reach out, but things he were doing? Because I noticed things with our son that I missed, and I learned from him, and I try to carry that forward.
Yeah, and first of all, Jeff, I stand with you whenever I speak to someone who's been bereaved in the same way that I have and my family has. I feel an instant bond with
Right.
them, and people are very kind and compassionate. But I think I certainly wouldn't have been able to understand this situation had I not had to live with it.
Yeah.
In terms of your question, with hindsight, I think it's one of those things, and I've heard this from a lot of bereaved parents, brothers, sisters, etc. You can tell yourself that you did everything that you could. We were a loving and close family. Ross was open about the severe depression that he'd suffered for 10 years, and we talked about it. He knew that we loved him, and it was a sort of mutual sort of love that we had. There are things now looking back that I wish I'd noticed. Ross got very good at pretending. He was quite a selfless individual and didn't want to, as he saw it, inflict his pain and his sadness on other people. So started to pretend that he was happier than he was. And I think, no matter how old your kids are, they're still your kids. Ross was 31, but it was just my kid.
Sure.
And I think back now and wonder, was he really as happy as he made out to be on this particular occasion, on this party or this anniversary? Was he going through the agony then, but protecting us by suppressing it? Even though, as I say, we talked about it. He got a little boy, Charlie, who was 3 years old when he died. And again, he lived for Charlie. And so you can sort of have this conversation with yourself in your mind and kind of tell yourself that it's okay. You did what you could. You were a good dad. You were a good parent. But then, as you probably know, that there are questions that emerge of their own accord, almost subconsciously, a voice inside your head that says, should I have done this? Should I have said that? Could we have done better? And that horrible feeling that, you weren't there. And I guess that this is going to be, an eternal thing, that feeling that if only I'd just been there to comfort him so that he wasn't alone, in those final minutes. But I do believe that suicide is never the answer. It just does not really solve anything. And I agree with the experts, the academics, the clinicians out there who say that in almost all cases, suicide is preventable. I don't think Ross chose the right path. There's no two ways about it. But there's something in me that makes me proud that he recognised that there was a cause to be championed in a world that he wouldn't be part of, because he left a long letter, 12 pages.
Oh,
wow. And in it, one of the things he said was, please fight for mental health. The support is just not there. And what he meant by that was that he'd suffered with severe depression, as I say, for sort of 10 years, went to ask for therapy and was put on a 6-month waiting list and died 2 weeks into the wait. And this is something that I've come across now. I've lost count of the number of people that I've spoken to for whom that is a very familiar story. And, when your son asks you to do that as, I guess, his dying wish, please, Dad, help other people like me, you don't refuse. You've got all the motivation that you need to sort of go out there and do as he asked. So that's what I'm just sort of trying to do, just do my bit really to make sure that the voices of all of those that we've lost are still heard, that their death meant something, and that we can follow their experience to help other people who find themselves in that same dark place. So that's basically what I'm just trying to do.
Well, there's a story within every story, and I've come up with this life statement for me. I call it my unique life statement. It's purpose becomes passion when it gets personal. And it's on the back of our shirts. It's on all my presentations. It's pretty simple. Purpose becomes passion when it gets personal. It's like, I'm 56 and, it took me a long time to find my passion. In a 32-year career of being a financial advisor, I thought that was my impact, my footprint on the world was setting up IRA and retirement accounts. And then death enters my life, and then it enters again when my wife died, that now it's an opportunity to be a better man, not a bitter man. And so I think your words hold true. And anybody watching this show that, has had something happen in their life, you have to find a way to look at it as an opportunity. Whether it's an opportunity for yourself to get healthier, whether it's an opportunity for you to share your story, to find people that can relate to it, so another child doesn't go down that road, or just, like I said, the people in your life become better. Something has to come out of this where we're not just surviving, Mike, but we're thriving, right? I mean, who wants to survive? I don't want to survive. I don't have time for that. I want to thrive. And people can say, well, how can you laugh, Jeff? How can you smile? Well, you know what? It's easy to, when you're grateful for the things that you have, and you honor the people that aren't here anymore by living an intentional, good life. And that's what Ross would want. That's what Seth would want. That's what Prudence would want. And by the way, they're right over my shoulder here. And I, in our app that's coming out this summer is named Brighton, and that's Seth's daughter. You mentioned Charlie. That is part of the legacy. And when Seth died, his daughter Brighton was born 3 weeks later. So Seth never got to meet, at least Ross got to meet Charlie. And I bet you're grateful for that, right? I mean, there's little nuggets. There's
Absolutely.
Little nuggets you got to hang on to.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself, Jeff. And I think that, somebody said to me early on in the stage of recovery, I guess, after we lost Ross, that learn to be grateful, teach yourself about gratitude. Yeah. And at first I didn't really understand exactly what that meant. And as time has passed, I think I've realized more and more exactly what that person was saying. And, you do find comfort in just the odd compassionate word or, anything, the birds in the trees, the sunrise, whatever.
Right.
Plus I've got a family. I've still got a family, a great family. And, how can I not be grateful for that? And it's a beautiful world. I think, there's so much out there. Life is worth living. And as you said, Seth wouldn't have wanted you to mourn forever. Yeah. Some days are hard, and I guess most days I probably shed a tear on most days at some stage.
Oh, yeah.
But that doesn't mean that, as you say, that you can't laugh, that you can't celebrate. Right. And, I'm looking for hope. I'm looking to try and provide what hope I can to other people. And one of the things about the sort of charity that I'm involved in is that we're trying to make it clear that this is about life and hope, not death and despair. Sure, it comes from a position of real despair,
Right.
but what we're trying to give back in Ross's name, and I'm sure in Seth's name, is something positive. And hopefully, in my case, that's just to those people who go through those dark times. I just want to make it clear that there is survival, there is hope, and there is help out there, and we want to show people where that help is.
I just feel compelled to make sure that Seth's footprint on the world is stronger with him not being here than if he would have been here. And only I and those close to him can continue that, because he can't do it anymore. And I think that's, with grandkids now involved, Charlie and Brighton, they're going to have some tough questions that they're going to ask Grandpa, when they get older. And I think for us to stop these cycles from repeating, because a lot of times these things do repeat, the percent, you probably know the percentages of children whose parents took their own lives, they have a higher percentage, I would guess, of suicidal. I'm just guessing. No different than alcoholics or, people that are addicted. They have a higher propensity to go down those roads. But we can break that cycle. We don't have to accept that narrative. We don't have to say, okay, that happened to you, now that defines you. No, it doesn't have to be that way. We are free to tell ourselves any story we want, Mike. And I think as an advocate, I'm a little bit further down the road. I'm 6 years into this. Seth died in 16, but my wife just died in June of 21 of alcohol. So, that's fresh, as in Ross's death is fresh to you. But, I go through my each day trying to figure out ways that I can leave a legacy in Seth's name and Prudence's name, not necessarily my name. I think that'll take care of itself if I do the best that I can in mental health advocacy. Let me talk to you about some of the projects since Ross passed. I see the poster behind you. I want to spend some time on the Baton of Hope that people here in the States can relate to. My Living Undeterred tour that I did, RV around the country for 95 days. You guys are doing something similar, but you're not doing it in an RV. You're doing it on foot. I'm so curious to hear about the genesis behind the Baton of Hope, how you're going to pull this off, how the support's been, and really curious to see where you have kind of settled into some advocacy and how you see the next generation of parents that are going through these things, how we can really start to change the narrative.
Yeah, well, the story began when I met Steve Phillip, another bereaved dad who I know that you've had on your program, a great guy who I met through our sort of mutual grief. Steve lost his son, Jordan, to suicide. We got together one day. We didn't know each other. We met up, had a coffee, and we got talking. And we were talking about the fact that so many people say, oh, yeah, but this is so complicated. Can we really get to the bottom of it? There are so many different strands and elements involved. And we kind of said, no, in some ways it's simple, that everybody who takes their life, that there is a common denominator, and that is the complete loss of hope. And what could we do to just bring some kind of hope to people? And fast forward a few months, and a company called Thomas Light, who are based here in the UK and have a royal warranty, they're goldsmiths and silversmiths to the royal family, found us and said they liked what we were doing and said, would you like somebody to design and craft the Baton of Hope? And, we tried to play it cool, but we basically snapped the hand off and said, yes, please.
Yeah.
And So they came on board. They've been brilliant. They're currently crafting the baton. What we wanted really was what we think or what we have described as the Olympic torch for medical for mental
Mm-hmm.
health. You know, there's an Olympic torch that sort of symbolises a celebration largely of physical health, and we wanted to try to identify some kind of symbol that would become potent and recognisable, that would carry optimism and a sense of responsibility. You know, it's a baton, right? Like in a relay
Mm.
race, that you pass it to each other, and whoever takes the baton takes
Yeah.
responsibility. So we wanted to pass it around the UK and spread the message that, you know, we have universal responsibility for suicide prevention, whether you're at the highest levels of government formulating health strategy or suicide prevention strategy, or if it's just an extra message, an extra text to your mate to say, how are you
Mm-hmm.
really? You know, or a hand on the shoulder, just a smile. We've all got a role to play. And this is the idea of Baton of Hope. And it really has taken off. We would never have imagined that day when we sat over coffee, you know, trying to think about what was the best thing to do with our lives and our grief. We would never have imagined that things would grow as fast as they have, and we're attracting huge interest in the UK. There's interest from around the world. We've had a lot of interest from the States and Australia in particular about whether, you know, a similar project could be carried out there. And yeah, I've never worked so hard in my life, and you know, I've worked hard in my life, but never this
I would
hard.
agree with that. I've kind of nestled into this place where I don't even consider it work because it just becomes part of breathing for me. And I'm sure you would be the same way. Yeah, we even at our last board meeting, we talked about what you guys are doing and possibly trying to figure a way to emulate something like that here, whether it's across the state of Iowa or the Midwest or something like that, similar to what the tour was last year in an RV. You know, that was 95 days and we made it to 38 states and met with 35 nonprofits. But, you know, I just want to always think of ways to honor those that are not here because, again, 820, I don't know about the UK, but this is just this staggering number, Mike. There's 825 Americans every single day that die by the deaths of despair, alcohol, suicide, and overdose. 825. Now, when I make that statement at a presentation that I'm giving, people will go, "Wow, that's horrific." I said, "Well, what's horrific is the emphasis on the death statistic. It doesn't have to take death to destroy a family. You know, we had 6 years of a horrific experience that adversely affected our family unit with Seth's addiction journey for 6 years, trying to get him help and understand what he was doing. I'd never done drugs, so I didn't. I was an alcoholic for 32 years, Mike, and I quit after Seth died. But I could relate to the alcoholism, but I couldn't relate to the drugs. And so the fact is that the media tends to focus on the deaths, and I'm like, yeah, we need to do that, but none of those people are coming back. But the ones that are alive, we have a chance to keep them alive. And so in the States, we have harm reduction. I'm sure you guys have similar areas with substance abuse where there's safe needle exchanges, fentanyl test strips, you know, trying to keep people that one more day mentality. And think of, and I don't know, maybe you know this, but there was a suicide advocate that was talking about the Golden Gate Bridge here in San Francisco, where there's apparently high suicide rates of people jumping. And I guess I don't know if this is a true or not. Maybe you know the story. Maybe there's something similar where you live, where they put like a net underneath, and some people that actually jumped thought they were, you know, jumping to their death. Well, the ones that landed in the net and then they talked to them later, it's like a high percentage of them, the moment they stepped off, regretted their decision, but they were already in motion. They couldn't stop. So it makes you wonder, is that net, we need to provide that net in society that when kids consider suicide or consider putting a needle in their arm with heroin, you know, or drinking to the point where their liver shuts down, we have to have a net. And what you and I and Steve and all the other wonderful advocates are trying to do is provide that net to get these kids one more day. I always think to myself, what happens if Seth would have tested his heroin and saw there was fentanyl in it? And what if he decided that that was the day he was going to quit? Who to say that maybe that was his sober date, like mine is December 24th of 17. I didn't think on December 23rd I'd quit drinking, but I did the next day. Well, we need to provide kids one more day, any way that we can. And again, going back to specifically suicide, what do you think are some of the things we can do to get kids to make it one more day, to make them, like you said, he made his decision, but obviously you're in agreement that was not the right decision. How do we get kids to see that more clearly when they're in the moment of despair? That's the really tough part for me is how do we owe it to them, Mike. I mean, that's the thing. Gen Z is like the first generation to admit that they have mental health issues. I know your son was a little bit older, but Gen Z goes all the way up to about 26, I think. What can we do to provide them that opportunity so they can make it to the next day and maybe start righting that ship? I struggle with that.
I think there are so many areas, so many answers to that question. And I think, to go right back to basics, I think the thing that we need to do, first of all, is talk and listen, encourage children to talk and be willing to listen, to validate what they're saying. I think we need to turn the prism so that we're seeing things in a different way to how we are at the moment, because here in the UK, when suicide is the biggest killer of under 35s, not COVID, not cancer, not drugs, not road accidents, not war, it's suicide. We have to ask ourselves as a society, are there some basic changes that we have to make? And I believe that there are. Even down to the language that we use. We often refer to people who self-harm as attention seeking when actually they're attention needing. The very fact that we still commonly use the phrase commit suicide when that word commit, as you will know, goes back to a time, certainly here, when suicide was considered to be a sin and a crime. And in my lifetime, people could be and were put in prison after recovering from a suicide.
That's just, I can't believe that.
No, and was I really part of a world? How could society have even thought about doing that? These are more enlightened times, but 60 odd years on, we're still using the language of the Dark Ages. We're still very reluctant to open up, to normalize the conversation around suicide. This huge stigma around the subject that we have to break through. We have to get to a point where children are comfortable, using appropriate language and sensitivity and compassion. There has to be a way that we can get to people before they reach that moment of crisis. I think it was Archbishop Desmond Tutu who said that we've got to stop fishing people out of the river and go downstream to find out why they jumped in the first place. And I think this is so true in every area of society, in the media, in education, in business, the workplace, everywhere. We need to question our basic approach to mental health, first of all. And I don't know how things are in the States, but we spend
terrible. They're terrible.
A minuscule amount of money, time, attention, purpose, you name it, on mental health compared with physical health. And the fact that you can go to hospital with a broken finger, and here you would maybe have to wait several hours, but you'd get seen that day. Ross was turned away and told, bye-bye, come back in 6 months' time. And we're just one family. He was just one man. And there are so many people out there who are going through that. So I think many areas, we had a headline in our newspapers here in the UK just a few weeks ago, a member of parliament who took some time off with depression. And the headline was, so-and-so MP admits to taking time off with depression. Admits?
Yeah, exactly.
Why?
That's terrible.
Why?
Yeah.
I wouldn't admit to a chest infection or
Yeah.
COVID. Why would
Yeah.
I admit to what many
Because it's
psychiatrists
a
call
moral failing in the eyes of society.
Yeah, absolutely. And vulnerability, particularly in men, is regarded as very much as a weakness. And I've set up 2 talking groups. I wanted to do something apart from the Baton of Hope. I wanted to do something hands-on and set up 2 talking groups based around football clubs in the city where I live in Yorkshire. And it's amazing just the difference that it's made. We've been going now for a year and a half for the first one, and it's amazing the difference it's made, and the fact that giving men an excuse in inverted commas to open up about what's going on inside their heart, their emotions, has really worked, and it's lifted my spirits to see that happening.
Let me ask you a question, Mike, because this came up yesterday on Twitter. I saw an article where someone had lost a loved one to drug poisoning. I used to say overdose, but Seth was murdered with fentanyl. There's no overdose with fentanyl; it kills you. Is that they were saying this person was kind of struggling with their advocacy because it's hard to raise money, and it's like you have 4 adolescents that die, let's say, or just 4 people that die. One is suicide, one is alcoholism, one is overdose, and one is cancer. It's 4 deaths, but the way that they are stigmatized is completely separate. I think, and again, I am not trying to demean the pain of somebody that lost a child in any way, shape, or form. To me, doesn't really matter. Loss is loss. But society says, this is what society says. And I know this because I struggle with raising money, and because Seth died by drugs, by fentanyl. And it's like people will say, well, I have $100 to give, but Seth kind of made his own bed. He made his own decision. He knew the risks, i.e. it's a moral failing. He chose to do heroin that day. But this other person that died, car accident or cancer, or whatever, they didn't have a choice. And so the people are more likely to be or empathetic in those regards. I saw someone post that on Twitter, and I've always thought this, but I've been very afraid to make those statements because I didn't want to get, canceled by people that are thinking I'm just an angry dad. I'm like, no, unless you've been in these shoes, you can't see the stigma that I see every day. If I'm in the same room of other deceased people and I bring up drugs and alcohol in my life, there's a different sense of how that's perceived. Do you feel the same way with suicide? Is there in the UK? Is there kind of a sense of a moral failing with that person that they kind of made that choice?
Definitely, and the examples that I've just used, I think, underline that the fact that we can refer to someone as having admitted to having had depression. It suggests that there's a level of guilt there about having had depression, and why should anybody feel guilty about that? I think you're absolutely right, Jeff. I think that grief is grief.
Yeah.
And, however you've lost somebody, especially if you've lost a child, that is absolutely life changing.
Mm-hmm.
But there certainly, I think one thing that I'm glad about, one thing that I'm grateful for is the fact that, you and I can have this conversation now. It's not so many years ago when people really weren't having these conversations. And I'm grateful to younger generations for pushing the boundaries a little bit and advancing the public discourse about mental health and suicide. They're the ones who've made it easier for society to open up. There's still a long way to go, and there's still so much that we can do, but at least things are starting to be feel a lot healthier. I sometimes draw a parallel between suicide and child abuse. That 20 years ago, child abuse was in a dark little
Mm-hmm.
corner, and children were told the default advice was don't say anything,
Right.
suppress it,
Right.
take it on the chin,
Right.
you deal with it. And now, because we've normalized conversations, we've shone a spotlight on the subject, we talk about it. Children know that there's a place to go. Children know that there are people who they can speak to, and lives are being saved. I still think of some things like suicide of being in that same murky corner, and we need to drag it out, shine a spotlight on it, talk about it, be open about it, acknowledge the scale of this social catastrophe, because we've got to acknowledge it before we can do anything about it. But we're moving towards that, and I think that is an entirely positive and hopeful thing.
Yeah, I remain optimistic each day, even though when I see the numbers in the states where they're just, you have to really look hard to find any statistic that gets better. It's just COVID really complicated things. I don't know if this is true in the UK, but I saw a study a while back where they said the highest year over year for suicide percentage increase, not numbers, was in the States. It was white middle-aged men, basically, us. And, again, I can see where a lot of things hit men in their mid 50s. Maybe they aren't as financially successful. Maybe their appearance is starting to really change. They look in the mirror and they feel 30, but they look 70, because they haven't taken care of themselves. Maybe their marriage is falling apart. The rates of kids that go off to college and then immediately spouses get divorced once they have to spend time together. Kids are like a convenient distraction to the integrity of a marriage sometimes. But I can relate to that. But that's just like, it doesn't have to be this way. That's the thing. It's like, we don't have to accept these statistics as the way it is. The statistics are where we should be spending our focus. That's the way I look at it. That doesn't
Yeah,
define
I
us.
think no, and we have to challenge the status quo because,
Mm-hmm.
again, here in the UK, the suicide statistics have stagnated for 15 years. And we've got to look at ourselves, we've got to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what is it that we're not getting
Mm-hmm.
right? Why haven't we made a single change really in 15 years? And I think it's a root and branch review of the methods that we've been using, the attitudes that we've been adopting, and the ways that we've been looking at things. I think we have to really, as I said earlier, turn that prism round and start seeing the world in a different way. We've got to ask the authorities what it is that they are not getting right. Because globally, I think the figures um, don't change that much, haven't changed that much. There have been some periods where suicide figures have fallen, and periods where they've risen.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, again, I think we're stuck, and we've got to be radical in the way that we think about tackling it now.
I think, what's your thoughts on the generation of kids that have a low sense of meaning and purpose? Where does that come into play for the well-being of an individual who's feeling like they're not worthy? Are there ways that we can get them to understand that they are worthy, and that, to give them the sense of purpose in their life so they can value their life more highly?
Again, I think it's about being validated, and it's about appealing to who we are as human beings. I think a lot of the humanity has been stripped out of our lives, due to online and people, relating to bots instead of speaking to real people,
Humans, yeah.
speaking to real people. We've become more and more isolated, almost sleepwalked into, I believe, into a situation where we've forgotten about the basics of what it is to be a human being. And I do feel for children growing up in an age where, for the very first time, perhaps in history, we've seriously had to face the possibility that this planet may not survive. For as long as we thought it was going to survive. I think anybody growing up with that thought going on in the background, in the subconscious or wherever, I think that's a difficult thing. You and I as kids, we had the sort of, or I at least, I think I'm a fair bit older than you, Jeff, but I remember the Cold War quite clearly, and the threat of nuclear war. But to have that, accepted as part of society's dialogue now that the planet is in a mess. That's a hard thing for kids, and especially when you've got all these technological changes that do remove people from people. I'm not against technology. Right. This is fantastic that I can talk to you now, across the pond, and we can have this conversation. It's brought us many benefits, but I think we just have to ask ourselves whether we're taking too much of the humanity out of it sometimes.
There's such an irony, and I mention this almost every time I'm either on a podcast or I'm hosting one. The irony is how connected we are, more than ever in human history. But I think when we look in the mirror, we feel a disconnect. Like we're just not really looking at anything. And that's that lack of confidence, lack of self-worth. I think for a lot of people, and I've occasionally went down this road where as good as social media has been for me to meet people like you and Steve and all the other great advocates I met, we have a tendency to compare too much, where I think sometimes I went through this early on in my advocacy that I wasn't doing enough, that, hey, Mike's doing this, I need to step up my game. And so as we tell kids not to have imposter syndrome, I think adults can be just as fallible in that area, where Facebook and LinkedIn, these things are great. But I think sometimes if people are not, I try to be very intentional in my posts and try to be less, braggadocious or so forth. So if somebody acknowledges me for an award or I get to speak somewhere, I try to spin it where the post is, the less about me I can do, the better, and try to bring in maybe a story that I met somebody and focus on them. And then at the same time, acknowledge that, hey, you know what? We're there. We're doing good. If you want to be so inclined to support us, here's how you do that. But trying to really pivot, Mike, so this whole thing isn't a me story, but it's a we story. There is no Mike, there's no Jeff. There's just Mike and Jeff. There's just we. And I think as advocates, we get so dialed into our own personal story that it becomes all consuming. And I've been very intentional in the last year to make my posts very different and not spend it just constantly putting, and I hate to say this because I'm not trying to be disparaging to anybody out there that does this, but if I just every day put pictures of Seth on LinkedIn, I will promise you people will get a little bit immune to it. They won't read what I put because they've seen the picture 100 times. And it's like, I'm trying to be better at bringing more people into this story, so the network gets out there even better, and it took me a long time because the first 2 years it was all about me, all about Seth, all about me, all about Seth. And I'm like, now I want to hear about, Ross. I want to hear about Charlie. I want to hear about the other people in your family. I want to hear about the charity that you're working with. And, I think that's important that we include the other people in our stories. And so more people can relate, right?
Absolutely right, Jeff. It's difficult.
It is hard because it's an addiction in itself. Our stories become very all-consuming.
Yeah, and I do genuinely believe that people with lived experience do have something that they can offer, and they do have something that they can put into the process of making things better in terms of suicide prevention or addiction, whatever it is. And I think you've made so many very astute points there, that the loneliness that you referred to, I think it's the unspoken pandemic that, despite being so connected and never been so connected in the history of our raised that we are fundamentally very
Mm-hmm.
lonely, and calls to mental health charities and have increased incredibly over the past few years. But I think you're right. I think it's about collaboration. I think we need to come together, speak with one voice. One thing that I've kind of discovered is that certainly here the suicide prevention community is very fragmented, and each group go and do their own thing, and very valuable things. There are a lot of
Yep.
good, decent, hard-working people out there who are achieving some amazing
Mm-hmm.
things. But sometimes I think we need to come together and be more collaborative. And this is one of the things that we're hoping to do with Baton of Hope, is to say this is not our
Yeah.
charity, this is not our campaign. It's a platform. It's your platform. It's your campaign. You use it, because ultimately we're all trying to do the same thing,
Yeah.
and that's to sort of save lives or enrich the lives of people who find themselves in a situation of despair. So I think
I
yeah,
noticed that really early,
absolutely.
Mike, in my advocacy. The first year or two when Seth died, and I started my book and started my podcast. I just had my 100th episode last week, so it's been under 3 years, but I've had a great run so far with it. But I noticed that there was this, you say fragmented, I say siloed, is that there was this, I'd meet somebody here, maybe locally, that their son had maybe taken their life, or they had passed away by, drugs or something. And it's like, hear their story, hear my story, and then we'd kind of part ways, and I'd see them making some great things and I'm doing things, and I'm like, is there any reason why we can't do this together? Is there any reason why, even if we're not joining our organizations, but show me the downside in collaboration, And I think the answer is a lot of nonprofits chase the same money, and when you're in a smaller area like Cedar Rapids here, even though it's the second largest city in Iowa behind Des Moines, um, I pretty much know a lot of the players here in town, and we run fundraisers. We kind of look and see when the other ones are being run, so they're not back to back necessarily, and we're trying to be respectful. And I know people jump from nonprofits to nonprofits, so you kind of take human capital as well. But it's like that model hasn't worked, and it doesn't work. And I think we just need to roll the sleeves up, and in your case, reach across the pond and say, "Hey, Mike, I want to help out. I want to, I can't physically come there, but how can I help you guys out, either as a sponsor or partner, or we'll donate T-shirts or water bottles, whatever we can do to ship out there to help you." And then, hopefully we can reciprocate that, and you can say, "Hey, Jeff, I love what you're doing on your tour. We want to give some pamphlets or, magnets or whatever." Someone tell me where there's a downside in any of that. I can't see it. So why don't we do more of it?
Yeah, and I think again, this is an area where there's opportunity that is created by
Right.
technology. Social media means that we can easily share things. We can share our influence. We can bring our influence together. So it's greater than the sum of its parts. And yeah, I think competition's a good thing, and there has to be an element of
Yeah.
competition, even in the sort of voluntary sector. There will be times when people are competing, but there are going to be lots of other times as well when we're kind of doing the same thing. And to affect real, tangible, measurable
Right.
change, we have to come together. And I suppose it's one reason everybody deals with this in a different way, and this is no criticism in any respect. There are a lot of charities out there, as I say, doing fantastic
Right.
work, but part of me wanted to create the Ross McCarthy Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when I thought about what Ross stood for, he wasn't that kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't, go out to draw attention to himself in that
Mm-hmm.
way. And I wanted something that everybody could unite
Mm-hmm.
behind. And this is why, with Steve, we thought long and hard about, first of all, really going to the drawing board and coming up with this symbol that we could use to unite
Right.
people. and hopefully that's what we've come up with, and this is what we're taking around the UK in summer. We're going to 12 cities in 12 days, and then we're hoping to make it an annual event and cover all the other areas that we haven't covered in the first year in subsequent years. But we've got lots of different things going on as well. We're putting together an education charter, a workplace charter, something again that's tangible, so that we create a legacy. It's not a stunt,
Right.
It's not just
Right.
a party.
Yep.
We want to be optimistic. It's the Baton of Hope after all, but we also want to hopefully, create change. I don't want sympathy. Um, don't get me wrong, the compassion that's been shown towards me and towards our family has been truly hardening, and it lifts your spirits. And to have interest from people such as yourself, Jeff, personally, is of enormous help to me. But we want to spread that around, and it's as I said earlier, it's the baton of hope is for everyone. We all have that universal responsibility, and we hope that as many people engage with the baton as can.
Maybe someday the baton could be over here, and we could continue the journey in the States, or something equivalent like that, where the two, your program and what we're working on could connect together. Obviously, I can't drive the RV over there and pick it up, but we could figure out something. But I like to think really big, to the point where a lot of people think I'm probably a bit loony. But that's just the way I think you're wired too. Is that I could do a little tiny fundraiser here and raise some money, or we could do something really historic and move the needle. Let me wrap up the show with this. I'm curious on what Mike McCarthy does for self-care. What do you do each day or each week? What I share at length about my self-care, and I will tell you, the Christmas after my wife died, I had my only brush with suicidal ideation. I share it publicly. I'll tell you, I was seconds away from ending my life. Very happy that whatever thought popped into my head at that moment, my two boys and other people close to me popped in my head. I didn't do it, but I do things now to prevent ever going back to that position. I know how that happened. I know why it happened. I'm curious on, what do you do every day to maintain your sanity and your peace of mind and your strength and your courage? I mean, what's your self-care routine?
I think just answering Ross's call helps. It makes me feel that there was and still is some value to his life and who he was and what he stood for. And I also try to listen. I take these two talking groups for men, and again, listening is just a word, but I think truly listening and understanding what's going on in people's heads and hearts. Again, it helps me to realise that in some ways we're all in this together. That nobody's alone. And speaking to people like you, Jeff, and recognising that I'm not alone as an individual. We're not alone as a family. There's a sort of worldwide community of us, is what gets me through, and what makes me want to go on living. And it's back to what we were saying earlier about gratitude. There is so much out there that I'm grateful for. The grief is eternal, and I have to accept that. It's not going to go away, and I've learning to accept that. But I'm also learning to see that there is so much to live for. It's a beautiful world. Right. There is hope. There is help out there. There is compassion. There is kindness. And also there's determination that we can change this. We can do something. We can change lives if we work together. And I truly, truly believe that. that together we can change things. And I hope one day that if we can bring the Baton of Hope, or baton, as you say, I love the way that you say baton, by the way, that maybe one day we can hold that baton together.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this,
Because
not maybe one day we will. I I like challenges. I like always having something bigger out there hanging, and I certainly would find a way to either have Living Undeterred participate, or our mental wellness app that we're launching this summer, Brighton, which is named after my granddaughter, get somehow that involved, that we can work together at some capacity. Last question I'm going to ask you is something I was asked by someone the other day that said, Jeff, I have a teenage daughter that I think it has suicidal ideation. What's the one question I can ask her without feeling like triggering or judging? What's a door opener a parent can say to a child to start this conversation on the right foot?
Again, I think it goes back to that word listen. Mm-hmm. That one of the greatest things that we can do for our kids is to hear them. When I look back, one of the things that perhaps I got wrong as a dad, you just want to fix your kids. Yep. You just want to do whatever you need to do to fix them. And, you're going to do this and you're going to do that, and we'll do this together. And maybe I thought too much along those lines and not enough along just listening. I think now it's widely recognized that, if you suspect that somebody is going through a period of suicidal ideation, that you ask them, are you contemplating suicide? The times when we thought that raising the subject would trigger suicide are over. That myth has well and truly been debunked. And I think, again, talking about normalizing the conversation, we have to do that. But more than anything, people want to be validated. We all want to be validated, and we all want to be heard.
Well, we have Ross, Seth, and Prudence pushing us forward every day, pulling us out of the abyss, as I like to say. And anybody listening here, anybody following, your story and mine, there's somebody. You don't have to go very far. May not be your immediate family. May have to be your second layer. It could be a neighbor, coworker. But somebody that is having these thoughts, is addicted to substance or alcohol. And we need to be there. Like you said, listening is very key, and being less judgmental. Something I struggled with. I think I probably judged my son and my wife frequently. And again, in hindsight, I can't go back and change that, but I can change how I react going forwards. So there's a lesson in everything. I really admire, meeting you and having a chance to follow you. And I'm very confident that, we'll find some way we can work together. We have too similar of mission and passion. And, the irony is that between you and I, we have lost somebody in each of the three diseases, deaths of despair: suicide, alcohol, and overdose. And, just you and I, two men, we can add three people to that. And so draw a line in the sand. Something's got to give. Something's got to stop. We just, we got to right the ship. And you and I, and an army of mental health warriors on our side, with us, not behind us or in front of us, but with us, we can get it done. I'm confident we can get this done. How do people reach you, Mike? If people want to follow you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, the website is the best way to make contact with us. It's www.batonofhopeuk.org. And anybody who's interested, please have a look at the website. If you want to register your interest in the Baton of Hope, you can do that on the website.
When's the date of it?
And the date of the actual tour is June the. I'm going to look at my whiteboard now. June the 25th to July the 6th. So we're starting in Glasgow in Scotland, and we're ending in the capital in London on July on July the 6th. And if there's anybody around in the UK then who wants to join in on any of the legs, please come along. It's for everybody. And yeah, we stand with you. If you want to be involved, we stand with you.
Well, you can count our support at some level. I can reach out to you later, have our team figure out a way to support you guys. And again, really, really appreciate the time you took to talk with us and for our followers here to hear more about your story. And I think you're doing great things, man. I'm really proud of you for what you've accomplished in 2 years, you know.
Well, the feeling's mutual, Jeff, and can I just say thank you for your interest, thank you for everything that Living Undeterred is doing, and thank goodness that you're here. The world needs people like you, so thank you.
Well, thank you. Back at you, and again, take a deep breath. For people who just navigated and traveled this hour with us, I appreciate you staying with us. This can be a tough topic. I give trigger warnings up front, and sometimes I end it with a little bit of a reminder that, we're here to help. There's lots of people that are willing to listen. There's lots of, in the States, we have the 988 crisis number now, national, 24/7. Great. It's not just for suicidal ideation. It's crisis. Anybody in crisis mode can contact the number. When it launched, it started off pretty slow, but now it's getting a lot of use, which is great. It's sad, but it's great. We need to have as many nets out there to catch people that we can to give them a second chance. So with that, love you like a brother, man. Appreciate what you're doing. And let's certainly stay in touch. Okay. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.